This is Inside Heavy's Behind the Cover, where we introduce you to the creators of classic hard rock and heavy metal album covers. In 1983, Def Leppard would release an album that would change everything for the band. They had written a collection of songs that was their best to date, and they had classic AC/DC producer Robert Mutt Lange in the producer's chair. Everything was pointing in the right direction for Def Leppard, and the final piece of the puzzle to be put into place was the album cover. For that job, they knew just who to turn to. Andie Airfix was known for his classic album artwork, and when they put him to task, he delivered. Andie's concept and design ideas for Pyromania created one of the most classic hard rock album covers of all time. And he is right here at Inside Heavy to give us the full backstory. So stay where you're at. We're talking about Pyromania with Andie Airfix right after this.
Heavy music. Do you like saving money? Then go to the Inside Heavy Metal Shop, where we've compiled a comprehensive list of all your favorite metal artists for the best prices on the internet. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. We've got clothing, jewelry, cell phones, and MP3 players. It's the Inside Heavy Metal Shop, powered by Amazon.com. Check it out.
We are back with Andie Airfix right here on Inside Heavy. We got Andie Airfix on the line with us talking about Pyromania. Andie, welcome to Inside Heavy.
Thank you.
Let's talk about Pyromania, classic album cover that you were involved in. But before we get too far into it, let me just ask you a quick question. What type of an artist are you? A graphic designer? Do you do fine art, paint?
I do fine art as well as graphic design, because obviously when I started, it was a very different set of tools I had to use. Obviously illustration, obviously way before computers, which obviously changed everything. I mean, I'm fairly good at computers, but my history is in fine arts and illustration, so it comes from a different source than most current graphic designers, basically.
Okay. Now, that brings up another question. How long have you been in the business of doing album covers and things?
Nearly 30 years.
Wow. And I know Def
Leppard was fairly early on. I mean, I'd done albums for a band called Dead or Alive and Thompson Twins, you may remember. Mm-hmm. And on the strength of those two, I had a phone call from Peter Mensch, who's Q Prime, who was the management of Def Leppard at the time, who called a meeting. He said, it seems like you've got a different approach, Andy, which is obviously what they wanted.
Right. Now, how did you get involved in CD? You were doing album covers and things of that nature. I assume that, you probably didn't set out to do album covers. How did you get drawn into working with rock bands and stuff?
Well, I did. I'd always wanted to do it, but it was a set of circumstances. I had no training in graphic design. Mm-hmm. But when I just spent 2 years in India living in the Himalayas, which is slightly different than living in London.
Right.
And when I came back, I had an exhibition of my paintings. From that, I got a job doing graphic design for a very large club in London. So we're talking sort of late 70s. And I said, I don't know anything about graphic design. And the guy said, well, just learn. Mm-hmm. So I kind of learnt on the hoof. But the club, there were lots of musicians who went to the club. I started to meet musicians, and I guess I started by meeting one or two people in the business who said, why don't you do an album sleeve for me? It really was as arbitrary as that.
Right. It was what was it about your work that caught their eye?
I think because my approach wasn't from a designer's point of view. It was more, I have images in my head of how to create things that are exciting, but very often if you go through the traditional way of design, you're taught things you can and you can't do. I mean, basically I was ignorant of those things, so I tried to do things that printers would say you can't do that, and I'd go, why not? And they go, well, actually maybe you can, let's try it. So the reputation became for trying new approaches to the work.
Mm-hmm. And then ultimately, you were contacted to do the Pyromania album cover.
Indeed, I was.
What did they want from you? What did they articulate they wanted from you for the album cover?
It was a difficult one because Peter Mensch called me up and said, "Look, we need a meeting. The band, they're not your average heavy rock band. You know, we're not talking, you know, bands that have terrible pictures of women riding motorbikes or fire-breathing monsters. So we've had enough of that. You know, there's a place for that, but this has got to be something different." He basically wanted to redefine the kind of rock and roll image. So it was quite a task from the beginning. Mm-hmm. You know, just to have a fresh approach to it. But obviously at the same time still maintaining what rock and roll meant. It had to be pretty full on, even though the imagery might be different.
Right. And what exactly was your role in the design of it? Now, I understand you worked with another artist who might have did the actual artwork, maybe?
Yeah, I did. There's a guy called, because when I came up with the idea for it, which I'll get into a bit later probably, but I basically sketched out, you know, what I wanted, mm-hmm. and, you know, quite clearly, in fact. But then, you know, not being an illustrator per se, then I had to find someone who could execute the idea. It was drawn up pretty much as you see now, but I needed a really good airbrush artist to do it, which I'm not an expert in, because I mean, one of the things I've learned over time is you can't do everything. Mm-hmm. You hire the best people to do particular things. And this guy had come to me literally 2 weeks before and showed me his portfolio, and I was very impressed with it. So I gave him, you know, what you see there, but my version of it, which was obviously rougher, and he modified it, made it sharper, made it more futuristic, I think, is what he did.
Mm-hmm. Right. Now, the actual artwork that was done on the album cover, I always thought looked kind of Marvel comic-like, I thought.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the nature of it, because what I had in my head as an image was something. Pyromania is obviously the starting point. Mm-hmm. So obviously we have to have fire, we have to have flames, and I just tried to think of the biggest scale, you know, of that kind of power. Mm-hmm. And so the burning building was a kind of starting point, but then it had to become much more than that. And I guess the modern side you see is when Bernard and I talked about the style of the illustration, we wanted it to be slightly futuristic, which I guess, you know, kind of relates to what you're talking about in that sort of comic book style. It's more sophisticated comic book, but I guess its references are quite similar.